Echoes of the Damned by Cordelia R. The narrow valley stretched before me, mist clinging to its slopes like a shroud. I adjusted my sound equipment, double-checking that everything was in working order. As a sound engineer, I'd recorded in some strange places, but Whisper Hollow was different. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, warning of unnatural echoes and voices carried on the wind. Perfect for my ambient nature album, I'd thought. Now, standing at the mouth of the valley as dusk approached, I wasn't so sure. I set up my first microphone, the sensitive equipment capable of picking up the faintest sounds. As I flipped the switch, a chill ran down my spine. Instead of the gentle rustle of leaves or chirping of birds, I heard whispers. Faint at first, but growing clearer with each passing moment. Snatches of conversation, fragments of psalms, and was that screaming? I yanked off my headphones, heart pounding. The valley was silent, save for the gentle sigh of the wind. Hesitantly, I put the headphones back on. The whispers returned immediately, more insistent now. "Help us," they seemed to say. "We're trapped. Help us." I told myself it was just the wind, my imagination running wild in this eerie place. But as darkness fell, the voices grew stronger, more desperate. I could distinguish individual words now, pleas for help and cries of anguish that made my blood run cold. I should have packed up then, should have run back to the safety of my car. But curiosity and the promise of a truly unique recording kept me rooted to the spot. I set up more microphones, spreading them throughout the valley. As midnight approached, the air grew heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. The voices in my headphones reached a fever pitch, hundreds of them overlapping in a cacophony of terror and despair. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I was about to call it a night when a new sound emerged. A single voice, clear as day, as if someone was standing right behind me. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, its tone filled with a mixture of pity and hunger. "But since you're here, perhaps you'd like to join us." I spun around, but there was no one there. Just empty air and swirling mist. As I turned back to my equipment, the mist began to coalesce, taking on vaguely human shapes. Panic gripped me. I scrambled to pack up my gear, but the mist figures were closing in, their whispers growing louder with each passing second. I abandoned the equipment and ran, their ethereal fingers brushing against my skin as I fled. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, slamming the door shut and peeling out of the parking area. In my rearview mirror, I saw the mist recede back into the valley, taking those haunting shapes with it. It wasn't until I was miles away, my heart rate finally slowing, that I realized I still had my portable recorder clipped to my belt. With shaking hands, I rewound it and pressed play. The whispers came through clear as crystal, but now I could understand every word. They spoke of a landslide long ago, of miners trapped and forgotten, of souls unable to move on, bound to the valley by their unfinished lives. And then, cutting through it all, that final voice. "You had heard us. You have recorded our pain, and now you are bound to us as well. We will follow you, haunt your dreams, whisper in your ear, until you return, until you set us free." I slammed the stop button, but it was too late. The damage was done. In the weeks that followed, I tried to forget about Whisper Hollow. I buried myself in work, in the noise and bustle of the city, but in quiet moments, I could hear them. Whispering, pleading, demanding. They're with me now. As I write this, their voice is a constant companion. I know I'll have to get back someday, to face whatever waits for me in that mist-shrouded valley. But for now, I cling to the noise of the living, drowning out the echoes of the damned with every ounce of my being. If you are reading this, heed my warning. Stay away from Whisper Hollow. Some sounds are never meant to be recorded. Some stories never meant to be heard. And some echo, once captured, will haunt you for the rest of your days. The Carver's Art by Amelia B. Pause. The quaint Appalachian town of Hollow Creek seemed frozen in time, its main street lined with weathered clapboard shops and folksy diners. As I drove into town, my artist's eye was immediately drawn to the intricate bone carvings displayed in nearly every window, delicate flowers, twisting vines, and hauntingly lifelike animal figures, all crafted from what I assumed was cattle bone. I'd come to Hollow Creek seeking inspiration, hoping to infuse my own sculptures with some of that raw, primal energy that seemed to pulse through Appalachian folk art. The locals were friendly enough, if a bit reserved, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes as they directed me to the Whittler's Rest, the town's only bed and breakfast. Martha, the innkeeper, was a wizened old woman with gnarled hands and eyes that seemed to look right through me. "You're here for the bone art, aren't you?" she cackled, handing me a rusty key. You best be careful what you go digging for. Some secrets are best left buried." I laughed off her warning, chalking it up to small-town superstition. But as night fell, an uneasiness settled over me. The wind whispered through the trees outside my window, carrying what sounded almost like distant screams. I told myself it was just coyotes, but sleep eluded me. The next day I set out to explore the town's galleries. Each shop held more exquisite pieces than the last, the bone sculptures becoming increasingly complex and lifelike. In the window of the final shop, a piece stopped me cold. A human hand, perfectly rendered in pale bone, reaching out as if pleading for help. The shopkeeper, a thin man with sunken eyes, noticed my interest. "Beautiful, ain't it?" he said, his voice raspy. "Old Jebediah's work. He's the best carver in these parts. Lives up in the hills, if you're keen to meet him." Something in the man's tone sent a chill down my spine, but my curiosity won out. I found myself driving up a winding dirt road, deeper into the mountains. Jebediah's cabin perched on the edge of cliff, surrounded by a sea of mist-shrouded pines. The old man who answered the door was a giant, his massive frame stooped with age. His workshop smelled of sawdust and something metallic I couldn't quite place. Bones of all shapes and sizes littered every surface. "You want to learn the craft?" Jebediah's voice was surprisingly gentle. "It ain't for the faint of heart. The bone remembers, you see. It holds the spirit of what it once was." As he spoke, he worked, his knife flashing, as he carved a delicate bird from what looked unsettlingly like a human femur. The bird seemed to come alive under his touch, its eyes holding an intelligence that made my skin crawl. "Where do you get the bones?" I asked, my mouth dry. Jebediah's eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake coming here. "Why, they come to me," he said softly. "Hikers mostly, folks who lose their way in these hills. It'd be a shame to let them go to waste, don't you think?" I backed away, my heart pounding. But Jebediah moved with surprising speed for his age. His hand clamped down on my arm like an iron vice. Now, he crooned. "Don't be afraid. You wanted to learn, didn't you? To be part of the art?" I fought, but it was useless against his unnatural strength. As consciousness faded, my last sight was of bones, hundreds of them, hanging from the ceiling like macabre wind chimes. And they were moving, clattering together as if stirred by some unholy breeze. I awoke to pain, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I was spread eagle on a wooden table, my limbs held fast by cruel iron shackles. Jebediah loomed over me, a glint of madness in his eyes. "The bone remembers," he whispered, raising a wicked-looking saw. "And soon, you'll remember too. Every cut, every scream, it'll all be there in the art. Ain't that beautiful?" I screamed then, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the cabin. But out here, deep in the hills, there was no one to hear, no one to help. Now I hang in Jebediah's workshop, my bones polished to a gleaming white. My fingers, so delicately carved, reach out in eternal supplication. And I remember. Oh God, how I remember. Tourists come sometimes admiring the old carver's work. They never suspect the truth behind the art, the souls trapped in ivory prisons. But I see the hunger in Jebediah's eyes as he watches them, and I know that soon, very soon, I'll have company in this gallery of the damned. The Depths of Desperation by Evelyn B. The rusted gates of the Hollow Mount coal mine loomed before me, a gaping maw ready to swallow what remained of my pride. I never thought I'd set foot in this godforsaken place again, not after the collapse that claimed my father and brother 5 years ago. Desperation has a way of making a man forget his fears. With trembling hands, I pulled on my hard hat and switched on the headlamp. The beam cut through the pre-dawn gloom, illuminating the weathered sign. Reopened under new management. Experienced miners wanted. New management, same old death trap, I thought bitterly. But with 3 kids to feed and the bank breathing down my neck, I didn't have the luxury of principles. The foreman, a weaselly man named Hank, barely glanced at my application before handing me a pickaxe. "You know the drill, Caleb," he grunted. "Follow the crew down to level 3. And don't go wandering off. Some areas are still unstable from the collapse." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat as I stepped into the rattling elevator cage. The descent seemed to take an eternity, the darkness pressing in on all sides. By the time we reached level 3, my shirt was soaked with cold sweat. The tunnels hadn't changed much. Still narrow, still oppressive. But there was something different in the air, a heaviness that went beyond the usual coal dust and damp. As we trudged deeper into the earth, the shadows seemed to writhe at the edges of our lamplight. "You hear that?" whispered Mike, a grizzled veteran miner. I strained my ears, catching what sounded like a faint tapping in the distance. Tap, tap, pulls, tap, tap. "Probably just water dripping," I said, not believing it for a second. Mike shook his head. "Sounds like pickaxes to me, but ain't nobody working that deep section since the collapse." A chill ran down my spine as we rounded a corner and came face to face with a hastily erected area. Beyond it lay the sealed-off area where the cave-in had occurred, where my family had died. The tapping was louder now, unmistakable, and it was coming from behind that barrier. "We should record this," I said, but Mike was already prying at the boards. "Could be civil others," he grunted. Trapped all this time. Before I could stop him, he'd created an opening large enough to squeeze through. Against my better judgment, I followed. The air on the other side was thick with dust and the sickly sweet stench of decay. Our lamps revealed a scene of utter devastation, twisted metal, shattered timbers, and half-buried mining equipment. But no bodies. Not a single one. The tapping grew louder as we pressed on, echoing from all around us. And then I saw them, pale figures moving in the darkness, their skin stretched tight over emaciated frames. Their eyes, when they turned to face us, were milky white and unseeing. "Dear God," Mike whispered. "It's the collapse victims. They're still down here." But these weren't men. Not anymore. As they shambled towards us, I saw the pickaxes fuse to their hands, becoming grotesque extensions of their bodies. Their mouths gaped open, revealing rows of jagged coal-black teeth. Mike's scream was cut short as the nearest creature swung its axe hand, cleaving his skull in two. I turned to run, but more of them were emerging from the shadows, blocking my escape. "Join us, brother," a horrifyingly familiar voice rasped. My father's face, or what was left of it, The Devil's Brew by Jasper H. The old distillery loomed before us, a decaying monument to Appalachian ingenuity and rebellion. Its weathered boards creaked in the chill autumn wind, and kudzu vines strangled what remained of the roof. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. Come on, Liam," Becky urged, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Don't chicken out now." I forced a grin, trying to match her enthusiasm. We'd been planning this little adventure for weeks, sneaking into the infamous Blackwater distillery, abandoned since Prohibition. Local legend said the last batch of moonshine made here was cursed, that it drove men mad. Just stories to scare kids, I told myself. The rusty padlock on the door gave way easily to Jake's bolt cutters. As we slipped inside, the musty air hit me like a wall. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight, and somewhere in the darkness, something skittered across rotting floorboards. "Check it out," Becky's voice echoed through the cavernous space. She stood before an ancient still, its copper dulled by decades of neglect. "Think there's any shine left?" Before I could answer, Jake let out a whoop. "Guys, go over here." He'd pried open a hidden compartment, revealing several dusty mason jars. The clear liquid inside caught the light of our flashlights, shimmering like liquid moonlight. "No way," I breathed. "That can't be." "Only one way to find out," Becky grinned, reaching for a jar. I should have stopped her, should have remembered the stories, the warnings, but the thrill of discovery, of tasting history, overwhelmed my better judgment. The moonshine burned golden down, hotter than any alcohol I'd ever tasted. It left a strange, almost metallic aftertaste that lingered on my tongue. For a moment, Nothing happened. Then the world began to spin. Colors became too bright, sounds too sharp. The shadows in the corners of the distillery seemed to writhe and pulse. I stumbled, my stomach churning. "Guys," my voice sounded distant, distorted. "I don't feel so good." But when I looked at my friends, the words died in my throat. Jake's eyes had gone completely black, his mouth stretched in an impossibly wide grin. Becky's skin seemed to ripple as if something was moving beneath it. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. This couldn't be real. It had to be the moonshine, some kind of hallucination. But when I opened my eyes, things had only gotten worse. The walls of the distillery were bleeding, thick black ichor oozing from between the boards. The air filled with whispers, 1,000 voices speaking words I couldn't quite make out. And my friends, God, my friends were changing. Jake's fingers elongated into wicked claws, his teeth sharpening to points. Becky's hair writhed like snakes, her eyes glowing an eerie green. They both turned to me, moving with a predatory grace that was anything but human. "What's wrong, Liam?" Becky's voice was a sibilant hiss. "Don't you want to play?" I ran. Out of the distillery, into the woods beyond. Branches whipped at my face as I stumbled through the underbrush, the world still spinning and distorting around me. Behind me, I could hear inhuman howls and the crashing of pursuit. I don't know how long I ran, hours, maybe days. Time lost all meaning in that nightmarish flight. When I finally collapsed, it was on the outskirts of town. My clothes torn and my body covered in scratches I don't remember receiving. They found me there, raving about monsters and cursed moonshine. No one believed me, of course. The Devil's Fiddle by Silas B. The crossroads loomed before me, a stark X carved into the misty Blue Ridge landscape. My hands trembled as I clutched my battered fiddle case, the weight of my decision pressing down on me like the fog that clung to the mountainside. I'd always dreamed of being the best fiddler these hills had ever seen, but years of practice had only gotten me so far. Now, standing at this infamous intersection where legend said deals were made with darker powers, I wondered if I was truly prepared for what came next. The old-timers spoke in hushed tones about musicians who come to this very spot, trading their souls for unnatural talent. They'd return changed, playing with a skill that seemed almost inhuman. But the price, they whispered, was always steeper than anyone could imagine. As the moon rose, painting the crossroads in an eerie silver light, I opened my fiddle case. The instrument inside seemed to hum with anticipation. Taking a deep breath, I raised the bow and began to play. The melody started slow and mournful, echoing off the surrounding hills. Then, as if possessed, my fingers flew across the strings, coaxing out a tune wilder than anything I'd ever played before. The music swirled around me like a living thing, and I swear I could see shapes dancing in the mist. Suddenly, the bow jerked in my hand, drawing across the strings with a screech that set my teeth on edge. The fiddle fell silent, and in that moment of quiet, I heard footsteps approaching. A figure emerged from the fog, tall and lean, with eyes that glowed like embers in the darkness. He wore an old-fashioned suit and carried a fiddle of his own, its wood so dark it seemed to swallow the moonlight. "Well now," he drawled, his voice smooth as honey and sharp as a blade. "Ain't you a bold one, calling me out on such a fine night?" My mouth went dry. Are you?" He grinned, revealing teeth too sharp to be human. "The devil? The fiddler at the crossroads? Old Scratch himself? I've been called many things, boy, but you can call me Mr. Black." He raised his fiddle, and without touching bow to string, began to play. The music that poured forth was unlike anything I'd ever heard, beautiful and terrible all at once. It made my soul ache with longing and my blood run cold with fear. When the last note faded, Mr. Black fixed me with those burning eyes. "So, boy, you want to make a deal?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "It's simple enough. I'll give you the skill you crave. Your music will move mountains and stir the hearts of all who hear it. In return, you'll play for me. Every soul your music touches becomes mine to claim." A chill ran down my spine, but the hunger for that talent overwhelmed any hesitation. I accept," I whispered. Mr. Black's grin widened. He reached out and grasped my fiddle, his touch leaving scorch marks on the wood. When he handed it back, I could feel the power thrumming through it. "Play," he commanded. And play I did. The music that flowed from my fiddle was otherworldly, filled with a passion and skill I'd never possessed before. I played until my fingers bled, until the sun began to peek over the mountains. As dawn broke, Mr. Black vanished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of brimstone. I stumbled home in a daze, clutching my transformed fiddle. Word of my newfound talent spread quickly. I played at every festival and gathering in the region, my music drawing crowds like never before. People wept, danced, and fell in love to the sound of my fiddle. I was living my dream. But as the months passed, I began to notice changes in those who'd heard me play. A darkness crept into their eyes, a hunger that couldn't be satisfied. Fights broke out at my performances, and whispers of strange occurrences followed in my wake. One night, after a particularly rousing show, I saw Mr. Black in the crowd. He nodded approvingly, then gestured to the mass of people swaying to my music. With horror, I realized I could see through them, translucent shapes with glowing eyes, just like his. I tried to stop playing, to warn them, but my hands wouldn't obey. The music poured out of me, louder and more frenzied than ever. As the crowd danced, their forms grew fainter, until they were nothing but wisps of fog swirling around me. Mr. Black approached, his grin wider than ever. "Well done, boy. You've paid your debt and then some. But why stop now? The night's still young, and there are so many more souls to be claimed." I wanted to refuse, to smash my fiddle and run. But as I raised the bow once more, I knew the terrible truth. I couldn't stop. I would play until every soul in these mountains was his. And God help me, part of me was looking forward to it. The Hunger of Green by Hazel T. I never should have bought this house. The realtor's eyes had gleamed too brightly when she'd shown me the overgrown garden, her smile a touch too wide as she'd said, "It just needs a little love." But the price was right, and I'd always dreamed of having a piece of land to call my own in these Appalachian hills. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking and settling in. I barely spared a glance for the tangled mess of vegetation behind the house. But as autumn's chill crept into the air, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. Armed with pruning shears and a determined spirit, I set out to tame the wilderness. The garden was worse than I'd remembered. Thick vines choked ancient trees, while thorny brambles formed impenetrable walls. The air hung heavy with the sickly sweet scent of rotting vegetation. As I hacked my way deeper into the overgrowth, an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right here. The plants seemed to resist my efforts, branches whipping back with unnatural force when I tried to cut them. More than once, I could have sworn I heard a low, keening sound, like wind through reeds. Except there was no breeze that day. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, I decided to call it quits. But when I turned to head back to the house, I realized with a jolt of panic that I couldn't see it anymore. The garden had closed in around me, creating a claustrophobic tunnel of green. I pushed forward, my heart racing. Thorns tore at my clothes and skin, drawing pinpricks of blood. The keening sound grew louder, resolving into something that chilled me to my core. Words, whispered by 1,000 plant-like voices. "Feed us," they seemed to say. "The witch is gone. Feed us." I stumbled into a small clearing and froze. In the center stood a gnarled old tree, its trunk twisted into the grotesque shape of a human face. At its base, half buried in the soil, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Bones. Human bones. Realization hit me like a physical blow. The witch, the garden, the bones. This wasn't just overgrown land. It was a carefully cultivated killing field. I turned to run, but the plants had other ideas. Vines shot out, wrapping around my ankles and wrists. I screamed as I was dragged to the ground, the earth beneath me disturbingly soft and warm. "Please," I begged, though I knew it was useless. "I'll leave. I'll never come back." The vines only tightened their grip. As I struggled, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. The neighboring plants were changing. Leaves elongated into grasping fingers. Flowers bloomed, revealing maws lined with thorn-like teeth. "We hunger," the garden whispered. She fed us well, but she is gone. You will feed us now. I felt the earth shift beneath me, trying to pull me down. In desperation, I reached for the pruning shears I'd dropped. My fingers closed around the handle, and with a surge of adrenaline, I began to hack at the vines, holding me. The garden's scream was deafening. Sap that looked disturbingly like blood oozed from the cuts I made. But for every vine I severed, 2 more took its place. I fought until my arms ached and my lungs burned, but it wasn't enough. As the last of my strength ebbed away, I saw a figure at the edge of the clearing. The realtor stood there, her smile as wide and unnatural as ever. "I'm sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all, "but the garden must be fed. It's particular about its caretakers. I had hoped you might be the one to replace the old witch, but it seems you lack the necessary qualities." I wanted to scream, to curse her, but the vines had worked their way into my mouth, choking off any sound. The last thing I saw before the earth closed over me was the realtor turning away, already rehearsing her sales pitch for the next unsuspecting victim. Now, I am part of the garden. My bones nourish the soil, my flesh feeds the hungry plants, and when I hear the crunch of tires on gravel, signaling the arrival of a potential buyer, I join my voice to the chorus. "Feed us," we whisper. "The garden must grow." And grow it will, nourished by the blood of the unwary, until it covers these hills in a tide of hungry green. The Mist's Embrace by Hazel B. The fog rolled in thick and heavy, blanketing the narrow Appalachian Valley in an impenetrable white shroud. I'd been hiking for hours, confident in my ability to navigate these familiar trails. But as the mist swallowed up every landmark, I realized with growing dread that I was hopelessly lost. My compass spun uselessly, as if the very magnetic fields of the earth had gone haywire. The eerie silence pressed in on me, broken only by the occasional drip of condensation from leaf to forest floor. I stumbled forward, hands outstretched, praying to feel the rough bark of a tree or the solid face of a rock. Instead, my fingers met only more fog. A fog that seemed to have substance, that parted reluctantly around my body, only to close in again behind me. It clung to my skin, leaving a film that felt uncomfortably like cobwebs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice muffled and strange in the thick air. "Is anyone there?" The fog swallowed my words, but in the silence that followed, I heard something. A whisper, so faint I might have imagined it. Then another, from a different direction. Soon, the air was filled with a chorus of barely audible murmurs. I spun around, trying to pinpoint their source. But the sounds seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Panic clawed at my throat as shapes began to form in the mist. Vague, humanoid figures that dissipated when I looked directly at them, only to reform in my peripheral vision. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. "This isn't funny." A laugh answered me then, high and cold and utterly inhuman. It was joined by others, a cacophony of mirth that set my teeth on edge. The fog shapes pressed closer, their features becoming more distinct. I saw faces, if you could call them that, with 2 wide mouths and empty, swirling voids where eyes should be. I ran, or tried to. The fog clung to my legs, making each step feel like I was wading through molasses. The laughter followed, growing louder and more frenzied. Ghostly hands reached for me, their touch leaving icy trails across my skin. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, I broke through into a small clearing. In the center stood an ancient gnarled tree, its branches reaching toward the hidden sky like grasping fingers. Relief flooded through me at the sight of something solid and real. But as I approached the tree, my blood ran cold. Carved into its trunk were words, hundreds of them, overlapping and intertwining. Names and dates, some so old they were barely legible. With growing horror, I realized they were epitaphs. "Welcome, traveler," a voice whispered directly in my ear. I whirled around to find myself face to face with one of the mist creatures. Its features were more defined now, a cruel parody of humanity carved from living fog. "We've been waiting for you." "What are you?" I managed to choke out. The thing's mouth stretched into an impossibly wide grin. "We are the forgotten, the lost, those who wandered into the mist and never found their way out again." More of the creatures emerged from the fog, surrounding me. Their whispers grew louder, more insistent. I could make out words now, pleas for help, cries of despair, and darker things that made my skin crawl. "Join us," they hissed in unison. "Become one with the mist. Never be alone again." I felt the fog creeping into my mouth, my nose filling my lungs with each panic breath. My vision began to blur, the world around me losing its solidity. With the last of my strength, I lunged for the tree, desperate for something to anchor me to reality. My hands sank into the bark, as if it were made of smoke. The last thing I saw before the mist claimed me entirely was my own name, carving itself into the trunk. Now, I am part of the fog, part of the whispers. I drift through this liminal space, neither fully here nor there. Sometimes, on days when the mist is particularly thick, I catch glimpses of the world I left behind. I see hikers, lost and afraid, stumbling through my domain, and I reach out to them, my voice joining the chorus of whispers. "Join us, sir," I call. "Become one with the mist. For in this place between worlds, loneliness is the greatest horror of all, and we will do anything, to make it stop." The Patchwork of Nightmares by Eliza B. I've always been drawn to the stories woven into fabric, the history stitched into every quilt. As a textile historian, I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found in that dusty corner of the Appalachian Folk Art Museum. The quilt hung innocuously on a far wall, its colors muted by age. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, just another example of traditional mountain craftsmanship. But as I approached, a chill ran down my spine. The patterns seemed to shift and writhe, as if alive beneath the fabric's surface. "Beautiful, ain't it?" The voice startled me. I turned to find an elderly woman, her eyes glinting with an unsettling light. "That there's the Dreamcatcher quilt. Been in these hills for generations." "It's unusual," I managed, unable to tear my gaze away from the hypnotic patterns. The old woman cackled. "Oh, it's more than that, dearie. They say it traps nightmares, keeps them safe and sound, so they can't trouble nobody no more." I should have walked away then, should have known that some stories are best left untold. But curiosity got the better of me. "May I examine it more closely?" I asked, already reaching for my white cotton gloves. The woman's grin widened, revealing teeth too sharp and numerous for a human mouth. "Oh, I reckon you should. It's been waiting for someone like you for a long, long time." As my fingers brushed the fabric, the world around me blurred. The museum faded away, replaced by a swirling vortex of color and shadow. I tried to pull back, but it was too late. The quilt had me in its grip. I fell through darkness, landing hard on what felt like solid ground. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in a forest, but like no forest I'd ever seen. The trees were twisted and wrong, their bark oozing a viscous black substance. The Words That Haunt by Jasper B. The old storyteller's eyes gleamed in the firelight as he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some tales," he said, "ain't meant for tellin'. They got power, you see. Speak 'em aloud and you might just bring 'em to life." I should have heeded his warning. But I was a folklorist, dedicated to preserving the oral traditions of these Appalachian hills. And this story, a tale so dark it was spoken of only in hushed tones, was my holy grail. "Please," I urged, holding up my recorder, "for the sake of preservation." The man's face twisted into a grimace. "On your head be it then," he muttered and began to speak. The tale he wove was unlike anything I'd ever heard. A story of ancient evil, of bargains struck in the depths of starless nights, of a creature that fed on fear and pain, summoned by words alone. With each sentence, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Shadows lengthened, riding at the edges of my vision. When he finished, silence fell like a shroud. The old man's eyes were wide, darting around the room, as if expecting something to materialize from the darkness. "It's done," he whispered. "God help us both." I thanked him and left, clutching my recorder like a talisman. That night, in my rented cabin, I listened to the playback. The story was even more chilling the second time around. As the last words faded, I felt a presence in the room. a weight to the air, as if something vast and hungry was pressing against the thin veil of reality. I told myself it was just my imagination, fired up by the eerie tale. But in the days that followed, strange things began to happen. Whispers in empty rooms, shadows moving against the flow of light, and always, the feeling of being watched. It came to a head at the Appalachian Folklore Festival. I was scheduled to present my findings, including the recording of that fateful story. As I set up my equipment, my hands shook. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to destroy the recording, to forget I'd ever heard those words. But academic pride won out. I had a room full of colleagues waiting to hear my groundbreaking discovery. I couldn't back out now. As the recording played, the room grew cold, breath frosted in the air, and the lights flickered ominously. I saw dawning horror on the faces of my audience as they realized, too late, that this was no ordinary folktale. The final words echoed through the conference hall, and with this telling, I call it forth. The eater of stories, the devourer of souls. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like tearing reality, something emerged from the shadows. It was darkness given form, a writhing mass of tentacles and too many eyes. The air filled the screams as it surged forward, engulfing the nearest listeners. I watched in helpless horror as my colleagues were consumed, their bodies dissolving into wisps of shadow. The creature grew with each victim, its bulk filling more and more of the room. Someone grabbed my arm, the bold storyteller, his face a mask of terror and fury. "Why have you done, you fool?" he hissed. "You've doomed us all." We ran, the sound of chaos and slaughter following us out of the building. But I knew, with sickening certainty, that there was no escaping what I'd unleashed. The story was out there now, recorded and shared. It would spread like a virus, each retelling bringing the horror to life again and again. That was 3 days ago. The creature has already consumed half the town, growing stronger with each soul it devours. The military has quarantined the area, but I fear it's only a matter of time before the story spreads beyond their containment. I'm recording this as a warning. If you hear a tale that chills you to your very core, that makes the shadows seem a little darker and the night a little longer, stop listening. Turn it off. Forget you ever heard it. Because some stories have power. Some stories can change the world. And some stories, God help us, can end it. Whispers in the Pines by Eliza B. Pause. The cabin loomed before me, a dark silhouette against the misty Smoky Mountain twilight. I clutched my suitcase tighter, the chill of the evening seeping into my bones. This was to be my sanctuary, my escape from the world that had taken James from me. But as I approached the weathered porch, a shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The key turned with a reluctant groan, and I stepped into the musty interior. Dust motes danced in the fading light that filtered through grimy windows. I fumbled for a light switch, but nothing happened. Of course, no electricity this far up the mountain. I lit a kerosene lamp, its warm glow barely pushing back the encroaching shadows. As night fell, the silence became oppressive. No cars, no distant voices, not even the hum of electronics, just the whisper of wind through the pines outside. I tried to busy myself unpacking, but every creak of the floorboards made me jump. James would have laughed at my nerves, told me to enjoy the solitude, but James wasn't here anymore. I awoke with a start, heart pounding. How long had I been asleep? The cabin was pitch black, the lamp having sputtered out, but something had wakened me. A sound. There, I heard it again, a whisper, so faint I could barely make it out. Sarah. My name, but that was impossible. I was alone here, miles from the nearest neighbor. It had to be the wind, my grief-addled mind playing tricks. I fumbled for matches, desperate to relight the lamp. "Sarah, I'm cold." The voice was clearer now, unmistakable. James's voice. But James was dead, buried 6 months ago. His couldn't be real. My hands shook as I struck match after match, each one guttering out before I could touch it to the wick. Sarah led me in. It was coming from outside now, a plaintive call that set ice through my veins. I backed away from the window, bumping into the rickety table. The lamp crashed to the floor, shattering. "Sarah, please." James's voice, but wrong somehow, hollow. hungry. I scrambled for the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I huddled on the bed, pulling the quilt tight around me, as if it could shield me from the impossibility outside. The whispers continued through the night. Sometimes James, sometimes other voices. Pleading, cajoling, growing angry as the hours wore on. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it did nothing to block them out. They seemed to come from inside my own head. As dawn's first light crept through the window, blessed silence fell. I stumbled from the bedroom, eyes red-rimmed and wild. The main room was exactly as I'd left it. Lamp shattered in the floor. No sign of disturbance. Had it all been a nightmare? I threw open the front door, desperate for fresh air, for normality. The scream caught in my throat. The clearing around the cabin was filled with pines, dozens more than had been there the day before. They pressed close, branches scraping against the walls, and carved into every trunk over and over again with a single word: Sarah. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the porch. The trees loomed over me, their branches swaying despite the still morning air. And from deep within the forest came a whisper carried on a non-existent breeze. "We've been waiting for you, Sarah. We're so lonely here." I ran down the mountain, heedless of the rocks that tore at my bare feet, away from the cabin, from the voices, from the trees that knew my name. I didn't stop until I reached the radio station miles below, babbling about whispering pines and voices in the night. They found the cabin empty, of course. No extra trees, no carvings. Just a grieving widow who'd had a...
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.